Hey everyone, in today's video we're going to discuss how Diablo 4's approach to itemization is in many ways revolutionary, but also sticks to the tried and true systems we love from past Diablo games. After all, Diablo 2 is the game that set the standard for so many games that came after it, many proclaiming it had near perfect itemization, and to this day many games still look to Diablo 2's itemization for inspiration. Now when it comes to Diablo 4, one of the most innovative new features and what I think is genius is that the appearance of weapons and equipment will be based on the region they are found in. Now this is incredible. Items will actually look different based on zone. So a chest armor found in Skazglen might have a more druidic look than a chest armor found in Kehjistan, which has a more arid environment, and therefore you might find the chest armor with more of a baggy cloth look to it. Now this is something completely new to ARPGs or any game as far as I know, and really helps with immersion, since you would think you would find items that look like they're from the zone you're in. Now I'm really excited to see if the same exact item dropping in two different zones looks different depending on the zone you found it in, right? And so that would mean that the artists are designing multiple appearances for the exact same item. Or on the flip side, if it's just certain zone themed items only drop in their zones and nowhere else. Either way, however they end up doing, I think it's a very cool immersive design that's different than what we've seen in the past. Now we've seen a few item tooltips and they're looking pretty great, but what we haven't seen live yet is that item tooltips are actually going to automatically adjust themselves when calculating lucky hit chance depending on what skill is equipped. Now the reason for this is because different skills have different proc coefficients, and so by changing your skills while hovering over an item, you can see in real time how that changes your proc coefficient. Now this is a great change, I believe, that will really help players better understand their proc chances based on the current skill equipped, and really just help players optimize their build by letting them switch through their skills and realize, oh, this is probably the best skill to use with this lucky hit, for example. So I think this is awesome, and it's going to help the player not have to do as much maybe online browsing, and they can just stay in the game and kind of figure it out for themselves. And if you're enjoying this video so far, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more Diablo 4 content. Now usually all characters in a Diablo game would typically equip a total of around 10 items, but in Diablo 4, barbarians are able to equip a total of 12 because of the arsenal system, which lets barbarians use different weapons for different skills, and rogues who can equip a total of 11 items because they can equip an additional ranged weapon. This is a very cool innovation for Diablo, which I'm actually interested to see how they end up balancing it, because an extra item slot in a game like Diablo I feel like could really tip the scales, especially a weapon in the barbarians case, or I guess both of them have weapons, right? This makes barbarians and rogues more hungry for loot, which means players might find it harder to find exactly what they're looking for because of the changes coming to trade. Now back in Diablo 2, trading was a great way to collect all of your best items. You might find the best weapon for Necromancer, but you're not a Necromancer, and so you want to trade it for one of your best items. Or maybe you'll just make a Necromancer later because you found that item. That's a way you could do it too. But for the purpose of this example, let's say you want to trade the item, right? Well, in Diablo 4, trading is going to be somewhat restricted. Certain items will be bound to your character and untradeable the moment you pick them up, meaning they are bound to your character and cannot be traded. This is called bind on pickup, and this is a system in World of Warcraft preventing certain powerful items from being traded. Developers have stated the main source for items should be from killing monsters, which I tend to agree with. I'm hopeful though that there will be a way to exchange items and equipment of value with other players in some form, and I think there will be, since the Diablo community is so creative. Now moving on to what items actually do in Diablo 4. Affixes have always been exciting and a core part of Diablo. Now one affix in particular from Diablo 2 that was not in Diablo 3 is finally returning to the Diablo universe, and that is the plus skill rank affix. Like in Diablo 2, different skills roll on specific item slots. So for example, some items only appearing on certain weapons, like in Diablo 2, Wolf's Head helms had druid skills, staves had sorceress skills, and what I'm actually interested to see here is if we can get other classes skills. So for example, in Diablo 2 Act 3, you could buy a Staff of Teleport, and that was amazing. It just enabled you to get around so much easier, right? You ran into a dead end, well, now you can teleport and get right back on your way. But teleport was a sorceress skill, and so being able to have that as a class other than sorceress was really, really cool. So I hope that's something that can happen again in Diablo 4 with these plus skill rank affixes, which are coming back. Okay, moving on to item qualities, which Diablo 2 established years and years ago and is still used in so many modern games, including Diablo 4. Item qualities include normal, magic, rare, legendary, set, and unique. Normal items will have no affixes. Magic items will have affixes such as plus 7% resource regeneration. Rare items will have affixes that are usually better than magic items and can also have legendary affixes. Legendary items modify skills like in Diablo 3, but unlike Diablo 3, Blizzard has emphasized that they're not going to rain from the sky, meaning they're going to be much more rare, even though there will be hundreds of legendary items in the game. Now, this is awesome because being able to spend years and years playing Diablo 4 and still not find like certain items is what I'm looking forward to. So I hope they put a ton of items that are rare in the game, and it just takes a long time to eventually see them. I think it's going to be a really fun way to explore Diablo 4 and make finding legendaries so much more meaningful. Now, legendaries will fall into a couple different categories, like generic, which any class can find useful. Something like enemies hit by your basic skills increase the damage of your next core skill by 20%. Or they'll be skill specific, which only a certain class like sorceress could find useful. Something like each time chain lightning bounces, gain 6 mana. Set items aren't going to be in the game at launch, but will be added post-launch and will be less powerful or equal in power to legendary items, and are really just meant to allow players to live out certain class fantasies or act as an introduction to the class, not so much as an endgame best in slot item like they are in Diablo 3, where every season has you going straight for your class set, which sort of destroyed the player's opportunity for any sort of equipment creativity. The last type of item quality is uniques. These are items which you design your build around that have fixed affixes and are heavily tied to class specific powers and themes. Very excited to see what some of those are. I'm also really excited to see that the item qualities appear to be a mixture of Diablo 2 and Diablo 3. I personally love Diablo 2 item qualities the best, but I think Diablo 3 legendaries were actually a lot of fun too, in the way that they could augment your character and sort of inspire you to play in a certain way. Now, I've seen the new inventory, and you can actually see here it's organized into 4 different tabs. You've got equipment, consumables, quest items, and aspects. This can be helpful to stay organized, but it also hints at the possibility that we may be looting a lot of quest items and holding on to a lot of consumables in Diablo 4. After all, if we have an entire tab for that, which is the same size as the equipment tab, then there should be the same amount of consumables as equipment theoretically and quest items. So I think this is a hint that, there's going to be a lot of stuff that you're picking up. Maybe you're going to collect like 20 or 40 different things for quests, and so you need a whole nother tab for it. But then again, the inventory could just be completely redesigned in the future. We'll have to see. It would be cool if you could put equipment in all the tabs, right? If that's the way you want to go. That's sort of interesting seeing this tab feature, and kind of interested to see how it fills up as we play the game. Now, one of the biggest surprises to me is that Diablo 4 developers have actually stated that the strength of your character is not going to come mostly from items, and I think this is an important point. Blizzard developers have stated their goal is for your power to come from a mixture of sources like skill upgrades, endgame systems like the Paragon board, leveling, and then finally items as well. Now, this is pretty surprising because items are so central to almost all Blizzard RPGs and most RPGs in general. Hunting for loot is just a core part of these games, and if items are only a part of that, I'm wondering what the other parts are that could possibly compete for your attention in the end game, because you're constantly always seeking loot. So I'm curious, are you just going to go out and grind XP instead of looking for loot, or is loot just going to be sort of a side objective? I'm interested to see how they end up pulling this off in the end. Another big part of Diablo 4 is actually going to be your mounts. Finding new and rare mounts beyond just horses is actually going to be part of the Diablo 4 experience. So I can only imagine, are we going to be riding demons? And what's interesting about mounts is that mounts themselves can even equip items which grant stats and change their appearance, or can make them even move faster. Now, I'm curious to see how big a role mounts are going to play in Diablo 4, and to be totally honest, I'm not too excited about the mounts. I mean, moving faster is great, but it does sound like they're going to be a pretty big part of the game, and it could be sort of like your companion in a way, since there's not going to be mercenaries or companions like there were in Diablo 3 and 2. So perhaps mounts is sort of taking that place. I'm also curious how mounts are going to affect PvP. Is it going to be sort of whoever gets their dismount attack off first is going to get a big advantage, or how soon after taking damage can you mount up again in PvP? So I wonder if it's going to be a lot of like remounting a lot in PvP. But hopefully Blizzard finds a good way to balance mounts and make it a fun system that works. Now, another big innovation in Diablo 4 is that creature types have an increased increased chance of dropping certain items. So for example, bandits, they're going to have an increased chance to drop maces, crossbows, and boots, while drowned, which is sort of an undead creature that came out of the ocean, are going to have an increased chance to drop pants. Other monster families like skeleton, fallen, and others will have their own increased drop chances, which hasn't been revealed yet. I think this is an interesting change. If you're looking for a specific piece of gear, you're going to go, okay, skeletons drop gloves. I'm going to go to this crypt and just farm for my best in slot glove, and sort of that sort of is how it's decided, right? So I'm interested to see if that's sort of the way we're going to do it, if that's their intention behind making certain monster families drop certain things, but we're gonna have to see ultimately how it turns out. When it comes to weapons, what I find interesting coming in Diablo 4 is that each weapon type is going to have inherent characteristics which can't be modified. So for example, bows, they're going to do plus X% damage to distant enemies. Staves are going to do plus X% damage to crowd-controlled enemies. So it's going to sound like this has really, it sounds like this really has the potential to control how you play the game. For example, if you're using a bow, you would almost want to be shooting at enemies that aren't even on your screen anymore, right? Like an entire screen away to maximize your damage bonus by using a bow. Or if you are wielding a staff, you're going to want to choose all crowd controlling skills to ensure you're always getting that plus damage. So I think it's going to depend on how much plus damage actually it ends up being to determine if players actually completely change their play style depending on what weapon they're using. But it also does feed in sort of the realism, the fantasy, the immersion of using your weapon properly, right? If you're using a bow, you probably shouldn't be in melee range. And so this sort of encourages players to use their weapons in a way that is logical. So I think this could be a cool system. Now, another new feature coming to Diablo is dungeons. And what's cool about these dungeons is that you can actually farm specific item slots of gear. So for example, gloves. I imagine when you mouse over a dungeon entrance, you might get information on it, sort of like a tooltip on what specific item slot is going to drop off the boss or the monsters in the dungeon. So you can decide accordingly if this is a dungeon you want to do. Now, this is an interesting idea, but I'm wondering how it will be implemented. It could be cool to know exactly what item slot drops and then seek it out, but it also kind of takes away from the randomness and the surprise of finding an item you didn't even know about. Of course, over time, everyone sort of learns where to farm certain items, so it might not be a bad idea to just show that in game so that you don't have to sort of look it up online or something like that. So I think it could be cool. Now, another new change coming in Diablo 4 is that primary stat main effects will be different depending on the class. So for example, strength is going to increase a barbarian's skill damage, but it's going to have actually no effect on sorceresses. Each stat also has a secondary bonus, which is going to actually be the same for all classes. So sticking with the strength example, one strength will increase armor by 1 regardless of your class. So this system makes sense, and it kind of allows for more deliberate choices to be made based on your stats. I've started to notice that Diablo 4 is almost trying to be a little bit more realistic, like with how weapons work and things like that. In more recent news, one of the most massive changes coming to Diablo 4 that we just learned about in the developer live stream at the end of February is that armor will also absorb elemental damage taken, which was only possible through resistances in past Diablo games. Armor will provide 50% of its reduction to elemental damage as well as its regular reduction to physical damage. So a max level character can get about 40% damage reduction to physical damage through armor, and therefore a 20% reduction to elemental damage through armor as well. Now, I actually enjoyed the separation between elemental damage and physical damage, so this change I don't know if I like. Of course, it helps newer players to not die instantly to cold damage when they have 0 resistance to it, but also that was sort of the fun of realizing that you need to go find equipment with cold resist. So this change feels a little bit catered more towards a casual player base in my opinion, but again, we'll have to see how powerful armor is in the end for defending against elemental damage. The amount of defense items will provide is determined by a new system called Item Power, which will be shown on an Items Tooltip, so you can kind of figure out how much armor each of your items is giving you. Monsters are also going to have armor, and that's going to scale with their level, giving them that physical and elemental damage reduction. And I think a lot of players will be excited to hear that Diablo 4 will use the personal loot system. Loot is generated separately per player, so there's no stress when a world boss dies to be in melee range and just click as fast as you can to grab whatever dropped. Loot that you see drop will be yours every single time. Now, overall, I think Diablo 4 has a lot of exciting new takes on itemization in an ARPG, and I'm actually really excited to test them out. Which new feature are you most excited about or most worried about? Let me know in the comments below. And that's all I have for you this time. If you guys like the video, don't forget to give it a like, and you may want to watch this video shown on the screen. I'll see you there.